Hello, everybody. Today we are going to talk about the next category of tissues, the connective tissues. Connective tissue is the most abundant tissue in your body and the most diverse types of tissue. Their functions are to bind structures together, so they connect things together. They provide support, protection, framework, fills space, stores fat, produces blood cells, and fights infection. So, lots of different functions, and as a result, we're going to see a lot of different structures in these tissues. Connective tissue is really different from epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue was primarily very closely packed cells, but connective tissue is composed more of scattered cells within something called a matrix, and that matrix is made of a ground substance and fibers. So, in most connective tissues, there are three types of cells. Mast cells, their job is to prevent blood clots. Macrophages, these are like white blood cells. Their job is to consume any bacteria or uh, damaged cellular debris. And then fibroblasts, these produce many, many fibers. Depending on the type of tissue, you could also get some other cell types in there. For example, you could get bone cells if we're talking about bone. You could get fat cells if we're talking about fat. So um, each connective tissue might be differentiated in such a way that it has different cell types, but these are sort of the main cells that you're going to find in the majority of these connective tissues. In connective tissues, it's mostly fibers, more fibers than there are cells. And there are two types of fibers. First is collagenous, which is made of collagen. Collagen is that stuff that you see in face creams. It is a protein, and it makes these long fibers that's found in bones, ligaments, and tendons. These are the thick pink fibers you see in these images. Very, very strong, very, very tough. And then you also get elastic fibers. These are, as the name implies, elastic. They are stretchier, more flexible. These are the smaller fibers that you see in these images of tissues. And then we see the little cells. Those are the fibroblasts that make these different fibers. So, what is this thing called the matrix? The matrix is the outside of the cell. Sometimes you hear it called the extracellular matrix. It contains fibers and a ground substance to make the matrix. The ground substance, you can think of it as almost like the cytoplasm of tissues. It can be a liquid, a gel, so it's sort of in between a liquid and a solid, or a solid. Blood, for example, is a type of connective tissue that has a liquid ground substance. Bone is another type of connective tissue that has a solid ground substance. And this ground substance fills the gaps in between the fibers and the cells. So we see this diagram of what connective tissue looks like. We have some epithelial cells, and then we have that basement membrane. And right underneath the basement membrane, we have our connective tissues. We have the ground substance that's sort of in the background that's filling the gaps. We have our collagen fibers, our thick fibers, and our stretchy, thin, elastic fibers. We have our fibroblasts, our cells that make these fibers, macrophages that help clean up the tissues, and mast cells that prevent blood clots. And then we'll also get some blood vessels coming in through these different tissues. Here are the different categories of connective tissue. First, we have the tissues that make up what's called the connective tissue proper. These connective tissues look very similar to this generic connective tissue that we were looking at earlier, with some slight differences. And these are fibrous connective tissue, loose connective tissue, and adipose tissue, also known as fat. The other categories of connective tissue are cartilage, bone, and blood. These do not look as similar to that generic connective tissue images that we were looking at earlier. They do have some similarities, but there are some big differences that make these tissues more unique and more specialized for their function. So let's start with loose connective tissue, also known as areolar connective tissue. The job of this tissue is to bind underlying organs to skin and to each other. It forms delicate, thin membranes throughout the body, and it nourishes nearby epithelial tissues. So this is what holds a lot of your body together. And we see that this looks very similar to that first image on connective tissue. We've got these thick pink collagen fibers, we have all these thin elastin fibers, and then these fibroblast cells scattered throughout. Next, we have adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is another word for fat. These are really big cells because they're filled with these really big fat droplets. And often with these, you can see the nucleus gets pushed all the way to the edge of the cell membrane. As you can see in this sketch, and then in these microscope images, you can see the nucleus, this dark spot in these cells, is pushed to the edge. Fat is important because it protects your internal organs, provides a cushion for them. It provides insulation to preserve your body heat, and it stores energy. Next, we have dense fibrous connective tissue. This has lots and lots of fibers in it, and it makes up your tendons and ligaments. Tendons link muscles to bones. So if you see here in this image of the foot, we see this tendon back here that's the Achilles tendon that connects your heel to your calf muscle. And then ligaments connect bone to bone. So we see in all the bones of the ankle and the foot, we see all these ligaments connecting them together. So tendons and ligaments are made of dense fibrous connective tissue. These are made of mostly collagen and elastin to withstand a lot of pulling, so very strong, very stretchy. However, there is little to no blood supply in these tissues. Not a whole lot of blood vessels traveling through there. Because there are fewer blood vessels, there's fewer nutrients going to these tissues, and it makes them very slow to heal injuries. If you have ever experienced a ligament tear, like an ACL tear or MCL tear, or a tendon injury, you know that they take a really long time to heal. So here's some more images of ligaments. These are some of the ligaments in your knee. This is your ACL here, and you've got your LCL and your MCL back here, and you have your PCL back there. These are all ligaments made of dense fibrous connective tissue. This is an image of what dense fibrous connective tissue looks like under the microscope. It's been stained so that they look blue, but you see all of the collagen fibers, mostly these fibers making these waves, and every now and then you see these little dark blue spots. Those are the nuclei of those fibroblast cells that make those fibers.